Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. Hello, my lovely. Let's jump straight into what we're talking about today, which is emotionally immature people. Now, the reason that I want to talk about this is because if you are working on your attachment patterns and you are aware that you have an insecure attachment, and I'm going to assume that you already know what I'm referring to when I'm talking about attachment patterns. And if you don't, I'm also going to link a couple of episodes that refer back to attachment patterns. But just to kind of give you a very quick overview, the attachment patterns that I'm referring to are the relational patterns that we learn and we adapt from our caregivers. So we learn these attachment patterns and how we relate and how we receive and how we respond to love and care, and also how we respond to neglect and emotional neglect and physical neglect as a result of the attachment patterns that we form with our caregivers. So if they are very responsive and able to meet our needs as we are going through those very early years and those formative years from being a baby, and those formative years are between 0 and 7. Those are the years that we develop our attachment patterns. These can also change over time depending on what your relationships are as a result of growing up, and our attachment patterns can change throughout the years. And I feel like I'm giving like a more of an in-depth kind of explanation, or I'm kind of whizzing through it. I'm not sure, it's not a great balance, but if you want to learn more about attachment and what that looks like specifically and the different attachment patterns that you can have, then do go and check out the previous episodes on attachment. I've got tons of them, but I will link maybe one or two just so that you have a frame of reference if you have no idea what attachment is listening to this episode. Okay, so emotionally immature people. When you are surrounding yourself with a lot of people who have emotional immaturity and are not able to meet you in different relational ways, that is going to reinforce your attachment patterns if you have attachment wounds. So if you are coming from a place of anxious attachment and avoidant attachment and disorganized attachment, it's probably going to trigger a lot more of your attachment wounds. It's going to trigger your feelings of high emotional responses depending on what those relational kind of dynamics and patterns are. So that's a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about today, so that you can also normalize that you are not going mad if you're finding it really difficult and really frustrating and really unfulfilling to be in contact and to have relationships with people who are emotionally immature. Now, what I also need to preface is that we all can have levels of emotional immaturity. It doesn't mean that we are bad people, and it doesn't mean that we are coming from a place of intent to cause harm. But sometimes the emotional immaturity that we have does relate to the environment that we've grown up in, not having that healthy emotional responsiveness modeled for us. So we haven't had parents who have shown us how to be emotionally mature, because again, it's something that they wasn't also taught. They also wasn't modeled some of these healthier patterns and healthier ways of being in relationship and being able to resolve conflict and difficult conversations and just difficult things that tend to come up in relationship dynamics, because that is just the part and parcel of what relationships entail. They entail good times and they entail bad times, and it's also about how you manage conflict. And generally speaking, we are not really taught how to manage conflict in a very healthy way. We tend to go to unhealthy patterns because that's what we've learned and that's what we can sometimes normalize. But I just want to make you more aware of what those patterns are, so you can know what to look out for in certain relationship types, and maybe recognizing that there are certain relationship types and dynamics that are not very good for you. And being real, there's going to probably be something in this that you can also connect with. And so I don't want you to freak out and be like, oh shit, I am emotionally immature. We all have traits of these kind of patterns, especially if we are triggered or if we are in a highly stressful situation. So I just want to normalize that these patterns are very much like everyday human relating patterns. Are they the best? No. But can we learn and can we grow from them? Abso-freaking-lutely. So that's what I am going to be deep diving into today. So here's the thing. If you are someone who is very self-aware and very reflective and possibly very high functioning in your relationships, and usually the person who is like an overgiver, a lot of the time people who are more on the spectrum of, say, I would say probably anxious attachment. No, not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are leaning more towards anxious or avoidant attachment, but I think the level of self-awareness you have. So for example, if maybe you were like an older sibling, because generally speaking, an older sibling tends to be the sibling who has to almost take a lot of responsibility in a family dynamic. If there are younger siblings, they end up having to be more wiser, more mature, and obviously this is not in every situation, but it's just like a typical dynamic that can happen in a lot of families, where the oldest sibling is given a lot of the responsibility and then also has to be the caretaker of the younger siblings and almost taking on a parental role in a lot of ways if the parents are, busy doing other things, working, trying to survive, trying to provide for the family. So again, a lot of these patterns are not intentional. The parents are not intentionally saying you have to also parent your siblings out of a place of malice. It can also be out of a place of survival. And so if you have then grown up in this position of being a caretaker from a very early age, having to work out how to navigate your own emotions, having to regulate yourself, having to be in this position of the fixer and not causing too much fuss in the family, because if you do, then that either creates more chaos and, you're just really like the responsible one, the grounded one, even though you didn't have a flipping clue because you were a kid trying to work all this stuff out, right? And so you didn't really have like a healthy model of what emotional regulation is, for example, or even how to manage conflict. But it was something that you had to figure out, and maybe you've done that through your own learning, through your own healing, through your own therapy, through books, like whatever the outlet is. You've probably had to try and fill in the gaps that you've recognized that wasn't part of your growing up and part of your development. So you've had to fill in those gaps. And when you are someone who is more self-reflective because of that, and perhaps because of trauma, it can mean that you also over-empathize with people, so that when you are dealing with people who are emotionally immature, you probably end up accepting more than what you should, because you understand and you can empathize where they are coming from. And it's not because you're naive, but you can tolerate a lot because of the environments that you've grown up in. And in a lot of ways, you're probably already used to dealing with emotional immaturity, that somehow you can also normalize that this is just how people are, and you've figured out ways how to navigate around them. But when you become more conscious of what those emotional immature patterns look like, you can also make some kind of decisions about the types of relationships that you want to continue to put energy and effort into, and maybe some of the ones that you think, actually, this space isn't for me, this relationship isn't for me, this type of person is not for me, or this is not the type of person that I want to be. What I tend to see in people who have low emotional maturity or emotional immaturity is that they find it really difficult to tolerate discomfort. It's really hard for them to take accountability for things. It's hard for them to resolve conflict or to approach conflict, or even what they perceive as conflict. And most of the time it actually isn't conflict. It's more just either getting feedback about something or just trying to find ways to make a relationship better. It's very hard for them to see that that is what feedback is. Sometimes they kind of perceive that as criticism. And because of that, they tend to lack the ability to be able to repair when a rupture or something bad or something that probably needs discussion or needs some kind of repair work to happen. They really struggle with doing that, and they would rather have other ways, unhealthy ways of managing, and it's not really managing through that, it's just not dealing with it, basically, because they've never learned how to. And I'm going to talk about the main types of emotional immaturity. Now, the first one is the defensive one, because when you are very defensive, everything feels like it's a personal attack rather than being able to sit with someone expressing a need, or to hear and understand that someone's expressing a need. They don't hear it as someone expressing themselves and sharing with them because they want to have a better connection and they want to improve the relationship. They perceive it as a criticism. They hear it as you're telling them that they're shit, they're not good enough, or that there's something wrong with them. And it might not be that you've got great delivery, or it could be that you have great delivery. Sometimes that's not even the issue. Sometimes you can tiptoe around it as much as possible. You can say it in the most gently, softly, empathic way that you most possibly can. And if they are also emotionally immature, it doesn't matter. They are just going to take it and perceive it as a criticism, especially if they haven't done their own self-work and they're also unwilling to self-reflect, think about it, and then come back to you. Usually when they are really, really emotionally immature, they won't even take the time to think about why you've given such feedback. They'll be more annoyed that you've given them the feedback in the first place. And when you have this a lot, what you might end up doing is you might start self-editing. So you might start editing what you say, how you say it. You might start feeling as though you are walking on eggshells, and you have to be really careful with how you approach the person because you don't want to set them off and you don't want to piss them off, essentially. But then what that means for you is that you start shrinking, and you might think that you're bad at communication, but it's not necessarily a communication problem. It's also an attachment wound problem and a nervous system problem, because their nervous system can't tolerate feedback without them perceiving it, and their attachment wound perceiving it as a criticism, as something negative. And a typical relational dynamic where this happens is when someone has more of an anxious attachment style and somebody else has an avoidant attachment style. And you can end up having like this pursuer and avoidance kind of dance where the person who is more anxiously attached is asking for more of what they need and asking for more connection, because they're coming from a place of also being triggered and needing to have that validation, and they're trying to create connection. And sometimes they do that in not very emotionally mature ways. Anyone of any kind of attachment style, your attachment style is kind of irrelevant in terms of anybody potentially can be emotionally immature. And I say it like that because sometimes there's almost like this victim mentality that comes in with anxious attachment. And so if you are anxiously attached, I am saying this with love, but it is something to have an awareness of, that sometimes because you have an anxious attachment and because you are seeking the connection and you're looking for more love and you're looking for more acceptance, that it almost positions you in a place of being the victim, because the avoidantly attached person looks very cold and they're distant, and instead of them reaching towards you for connection, what helps them to feel safer is to have the distance and to have space. And because they're not meeting your attachment needs, and because it can look quite selfish, even though the root of it all is in attachment wounds and trauma, it almost positions the anxiously attached person as the victim and the avoidantly attached person as the persecutor or the villain. And so we need to have a little bit more understanding, but also recognizing when we can sometimes be putting ourselves in these types of positions, because also that's not very healthy for relationships and dynamics either. And then we have the person who is the gaslighter, and they tend to distort and rewrite the reality and change the narrative of what's happened by trying to make you look like you're going crazy, by almost denying your experience and denying the truth. And so you can be positioned as you're being too sensitive, or that never happened. And gaslighting really is a very manipulative tactic, and it's a way of avoiding accountability and it really does cause a lot of mental exhaustion. So if you are in a pattern with someone who distorts reality, after some time, it can make you question if you are right about things, and it can mean that you stop trusting your own intuition and you stop trusting your own judgment, and you feel as though you need to either keep a log of things, or you need to maybe keep messages because you need to keep receipts. And because it feels in a lot of ways like you're going a bit crazy, because you're like, I know it didn't happen that way, but this person who I have, a connection with or a relationship with is telling me, and they really mean it, and it sounds really convincing, that it didn't happen that way. So maybe I've over exaggerated, or maybe I'm mistaken. And sometimes it's not just the fact that it's, sometimes people can have different perception, but gaslighting is very intentional. It's intentionally designed to make you doubt yourself, and it obviously changes the narrative. So it's not just about having a difference of opinion, which I think some people can confuse that with, because we do have, difference of opinions, we have different perceptions, and our understanding of things can be different. But that's not what gaslighting is. Gaslighting is very intentional, and it's a rewriting of the truth. And it's designed to cause confusion and to make you doubt yourself. And it's designed to make you deny your own experience. And so you stop trusting your perception of things, and you start having a lot more mental doubt, and you start having mental fog, and you start seeking more validation from others or other people to witness, because you can't trust your own judgment anymore. So that can be a really tough and tricky type of dynamic to be in, especially if you're trying to work on secure attachment. That is literally going to cause havoc on your nervous system. And then we have the person who is the minimiser, and the minimiser is great at making it seem as though you are over exaggerating, or that your emotions and your feelings are too much, you're too sensitive, and they just minimize everything about their experience. And this is coming from a place of usually their own ego and their place of shame, because they can't admit if they are doing something wrong, or if they are being perceived as what they might see as like the bad person in the picture. So they just find ways to minimize your experience and invalidate your experience. And so when you talk about and you share how their behavior might have impacted you, they make it seem like it's not that big of a deal. And so you might stay in that kind of dynamic because you've already been taught how to minimize yourself. But what that means is that you also disconnect from your own emotional signals, because you're so used to someone telling you that your signals are wrong, or there's no place for it. So you start doing that yourself. You start minimizing your own feelings. You start invalidating your own experiences. Okay, and now we have the person who is the avoidant. And shock, horror, they tend to be more of the person who has the avoidant attachment, for obvious reasons, I believe. But what they tend to do is they withdraw during conflict. Instead of being able to lean into connection with someone, they tend to lean away, and they shut down, and they find it hard to speak up. They have such an aversion to conflict that even when it's not conflict and it's just a conversation, they will perceive it as conflict when it's just talking, or it's connection, or it's just trying to create some kind of understanding in the dynamic, whether it is in a work context, or if it's in a romantic context, family. Like, this pattern comes up pretty much everywhere. A lot of people tend to have this kind of avoidant tendency, and they tend to name it as, oh, I don't like conflict. But a lot of the time they're perceiving regular communication as conflict. And so it kind of means that they're not able to take accountability for how they show up in situations, or the fact that they don't even show up in situations when it's just a natural part of relationships. There's going to be feedback that comes to you, and there should be feedback that comes back to you about how you are and your impact on people. And so if you are avoidant of that, you're not just conflict avoidant, you're also relationship avoidant. And typically, instead of being able to face whether it's an uncomfortable conversation or an uncomfortable situation, they will change the subject, they will go cold, they will shut down, they will have nothing to add, they are going to hide in different ways, whether it's hiding through alcohol, whether it is hiding through sex, hiding through drugs, hiding through whatever helps to keep them self-protected. That's the type of self-protective behaviors that they turn to. And it can mean that if you're in a relationship with someone who is very avoidant, it can feel very lonely because they don't really understand the point of intimacy in relationships. And so therefore it can feel like you're constantly trying to chase them for connection, but what they perceive it as is that you're chasing them for conflict, or you're chasing them because you need something from them. And in a way, you might need something from them because it's normal to need something in relationships, but they're not great at being needed and needing anyone. And that is what triggers their nervous system to want to retreat, and for them, they find safety in that retreat. And part of their work is being able to notice those patterns in themselves and regulate themselves, and also change not only their mindset, but also self-reflect on their impact on other people without always turning it into a position of being blamed or feeling shame all of the time. It's trying to work through that and process through that. And that's why, things like therapy and being able to self-reflect and be able to regulate your nervous system, that's where all of that stuff comes into play. I will say that I'm talking about it in a very simple way. It is not simple. It is not an easy thing to do. It is definitely something that takes practice and it takes work. Unfortunately, I wish there was a magic pill that I could just give you, but there's not. There's no magic wand. There's no quick answer. Sorry, but it's true. And then the final one is the victim performer. And this is the type of person who tends to collapse when they are confronted. And probably a lot of the time, people with more anxious attachment traits can kind of fall into some of this because they're used to, and I talked about this already a little bit before, when you kind of position yourself in the place of being a victim. And so in any kind of interaction or altercation or communication, it can seem like they are the most wounded one in the room because they are the one who is usually the most outwardly upset. And just because they are the most outwardly upset person, so just because they are the person who cries, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the one who has been impacted the most. But sometimes it can feel that way. It can feel as though you have to micromanage their emotions as well as yours, because there's almost no space for your feelings and your emotions, because sometimes they can take up all of the space, all of the emotional space, and need all of the emotional comfort when they're not also thinking about the impact that it has on you and the fact that you also have to regulate your own nervous system, let alone having to be responsible to regulate their nervous system as well and to self-soothe them. And if you are also somewhat empathic and self-reflective, you don't want to be mean, you don't want to be cruel, and so you can end up again over empathizing with this person and really wanting to not cause harm, and so you can tend to over function and give more. You almost become the emotional parent for them. You become the person who has to regulate their emotions for them because they're not able to do that for themselves, and sometimes they almost give you that responsibility without taking on that responsibility for themselves. Okay, I really feel like that was a lot and that you might have to sit with that for a minute, and you might have to let it marinate, process it and think, oh, how is that showing up for me? It might have brought up some uncomfortable feelings in you. You might recognize some of yourself in what I've described, or you might recognize the patterns or the relationships that you're in where a lot of this is happening. And the problem with staying in these relationship dynamics is that they reinforce your attachment wounds and your abandonment wounds, because ultimately what it reinforces is the misattunement and the misalignment in connection, which is at the root and the heart of what attachment wounds are. It's not feeling seen, it's not feeling validated, it's not having your needs met. And so if you are constantly having people who are gaslighting you, who are minimizing your experience, who are making you feel like you are hard to be loved or hard to be accepted, it's a reinforcement of that disconnection. It's what causes relationship anxiety. It's what causes chronic anxiety in you. It's what causes anxiety and dysregulation in your nervous system. It causes a lot of self-doubt It makes you become less connected to your intuition. It creates emotional numbness and a lot of resentment that you're not allowed to express, because even when you do express it, it's not met with empathy and it's not met with understanding, because you can still love someone and at the same time be harmed by their emotional immaturity. It's not about avoiding emotionally immature people, because unfortunately we can't avoid people and just decide that we're just not going to have anything to do with someone who has some of these traits. It's not so much about the traits, it's also about how that person or how the relationship makes you feel. And if there is a constant pattern of these are the type of relationships that you are choosing, it's about, well, how can you choose differently? How can you show up differently? How can you have different expectations of relationships and of people? And if it relates more to you having these behaviours and these patterns, it's how do you show up differently? How do you increase your emotional intelligence and increasing your capacity to have not only difficult conversations, but to stop being so defensive or jumping to defensiveness and being more open to hearing feedback, increasing your tolerance for discomfort so that you can have deeper connection and deeper relationships, because being able to receive and give that feedback is just part of what healthy relationships are. And it's also what healthy attachment in relationship is. It's to stop abandoning yourself in order for you to keep relationships with these people. If this is calling to you, you are most welcome to get in touch about therapy. I work one-to-one online and also in the UK in St Albans, Hertfordshire, if that is local to you. But I mainly work with clients in the UK and in the EU. Okay, I hope that was really helpful for you. I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.